If do we have any others? I saw a couple of lights flicker briefly. If not, I'll light a final candle for joys and concerns felt but not expressed. So Victor, we don't have their music now, right?
No,
just meditation.
Next is meditation.
Got it.
Then the story, then your talk, then the
Okay. For meditation today, this is a little less irreverent than my opening. I'll do this brief statement, and then we'll spend a couple of moments in silent meditation, and then we will sing briefly together. If you pour a handful of salt into a cup of water, the water becomes undrinkable. But if you pour the salt into a river, people can continue to draw the water to cook, to wash, and to drink. The river is immense, and it has the capacity to receive, embrace, and transform. When our hearts are small, our understanding and compassion are limited, and we suffer. We can't accept or tolerate others and their shortcomings, and we demand that they change. But when our hearts expand, these same things don't make us suffer anymore. We have a lot of understanding and compassion and can embrace others. We accept others as they are, and then they have a chance to transform. I love that song. The title of my presentation is Elemental Compassion. I have my own sense of what compassion is, but it's been so hard for me to put it into a definitive box. Been driving me crazy for a couple of weeks because I often like to start with a definition on this kind of a morning. I'm kind of a word guy. But for me today, regarding coming up with a definition that feels right, in the immortal words of my friend Matt, years ago during his very brief stint as a computer technician, it just doesn't freaking work. So yes, compassion is kindness and suffering with and connecting honestly with another person, with all people, with oneself, and behaving accordingly, and so much more. Like earth, air, fire, and water, compassion is really big and complex / simple at the same time. And I think, like those other elements, very, very old. So like the title says, elemental. For today, I'd like to let definition rest and start with a story about where compassion may have come from. The story is the mom who discovered compassion. Imagine a time before cities, roads, or cars, before houses, before music, or schools, or money. The whole earth then was somewhat the same as it is now in what we call wilderness, undeveloped or primitive areas. There were people there, though, our ancestors, our great, 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 lots more greats, grandparents. These early ancestors lived very differently from us. Most of their time was devoted to just trying to stay alive and safe. They lived off the land, finding edible plants, hunting, seeking shelter. Other creatures hunted them. It was a little like camping in Yellowstone or Alaska or in the desert full-time with crude gear, just what you could find or make for yourself. Two more things before we meet one of those ancestors of ours more personally. First, their senses, hearing, eyesight, smell, taste, and touch, and their instincts probably were much sharper than ours are now. They had to be in order for them to survive in such a wild world. Second, their brains were different from ours. Today, we talk about old brain and new brain. Early ancestors had mostly old brain in order to survive. Fight, flight, freeze, find shelter. That's all old brain stuff, and there was a lot of it. When they saw a wolf in the distance, or heard or smelled a wolf, they reacted instead of thinking it over, or they didn't survive. Old brain is out of there when something like that happens. A new brain might think, what a beautiful wolf. How does he keep his teeth so white? And that would be bad back in that time. Or if a dead tree begins to fall nearby, old brain makes the legs run right away. New brain might wonder, gosh, is that an ash tree or a sycamore tree up there? In fact, old brain didn't even use words or language very well. That's right. In the time we're talking about, our ancestors may have communicated with a few simple sounds, but they had no developed language. Wouldn't that be odd? One afternoon, a young mother We'll call her Eve. She sat with her baby in the shelter of some trees and rocks to rest and watch her little baby. Since there were no words in the world, she really didn't have a name, but we'll call her Eve anyway, just so we know kind of who we're talking about. She sat with her baby playing on the ground at her feet. She looked all around and listened and smelled. The birds were relaxed and feeding. Some of her clan were nearby. Her sharp senses and her strong instincts told her that for a moment they were safe, and that she could briefly take time to gaze into her baby's eyes. Her baby was Meg. Meg stopped playing in the dust. And as her mother looked at her, her brown eyes widened in that incredible way only babies have. And she reached out her hand, not in fear or in need, but just to touch Eve's leg. Scooping the baby into her lap, Eve began to cry, softly and quietly, because it was safer. That strange thing was happening again. Eve certainly didn't understand any of this, but her senses and intuition told her that it was good. It felt to Eve like before Meg was born, as if Eve still had the baby inside her, but also could see her out in the world before her. It was a fullness, as if they could both see and be each other. A warm, comforting feeling. And then it was again time to scan for possible dangers. Eve rose, carrying Meg to return to camp. Moving back along the path, Eve made a sound, not a word. They really didn't have words, just a little sound. It was, Her mate, also returning to camp, heard and saw Eve's drying tears and immediately tensed for danger. Eve's quick, soft touch on his arm said that she was safe, and he looked at her for a moment, then resumed the watchful return to camp. Eve had discovered what we now know as compassion, and a few others around the world were having similar experiences. It would be a long, long time before compassion would become widely known or named. But you should know a couple more things about Eve's clan and compassion. Years later, after Meg, the baby, was grown and a mother herself, she sat with Eve, her mom, as often as she could toward the end of Eve's life, and held her still strong brown hand. They were joined from time to time by Meg's mate. He had become a part of their clan as a young boy, but was not born into the clan. Eve's mate, Meg's father, had come upon the boy lost in the woods, forgotten or shunned by his own clan. Common practice back then was to just pass by such a boy in the woods to avoid trouble, or even to do harm to him. Eve's mate, however, had looked into the boy's eyes, made that same sound, and then had picked him up and brought him back to Eve to be raised as theirs. The second thing to know is that we still hear that sound in UU gatherings all over the world, or at least in Sheridan. And I have a question for children of any age but we'll take a minute to think about what do you think that sound means to us now? Any thoughts on that? We'll return to the story in a minute. Anyone else familiar with that? Anybody that's been to fellowship knows that much of the time, rather than saying amen or you go girl, we say which means that may be important. It's fascinating.
Or I hear you.
Or I hear you. Well, think about that. If you can think of other things that may mean to us, we'll have time during discussion. In these modern times, it's easy for us to consider the people of Eve's clan as primitive. But the combination of their heightened physical senses and instincts with the tiny new brain that was just beginning to emerge made Eve's compassionate seeing of Meg not only possible, but perhaps even stronger in some ways than for us now. While our language and complex reasoning can certainly define, classify, and add layers of nuance to compassion, it can also get in the way, dilute, and distract us modern folks from just deeply, deeply seeing and sensing each other. And that seeing is the calm part of compassion. It's us together as one. Eve was not speculating or philosophizing about connecting with Meg. It was for them a direct experience. And Eve's brief tears, an expression of the depth of their connection, also reflected the passion, the suffering of their very existence, surrounded as they were literally and figuratively by ever-present mortal danger. While Eve had no complex language, we see the poignancy of her compassionate connection in their dangerous and beautiful world. And so for us now, the possibilities seem endless. Even though our physical senses may be somewhat less acute than Eve's, and our ability to function and survive naked and without tools in wilderness is questionable, our new brain has allowed us to reach incredible levels of safety, protection, comfort, mobility, creativity, complex knowledge, and information, and freedom, and choice. Eve and her clan could never imagine such a world. New brain and old brain working seamlessly together, or so it would seem. And how is our compassion in this astounding world of ours? Yes, the possibilities are truly endless for us. Let's talk for a minute about that. Let's talk for just a moment about the possibilities we choose. Eve and Meg lived in a clan and in a tribe. It was necessary for their survival and certainly had its pluses and minuses. What about our clans and our tribes? I'll get right to my point and try to make it a point rather than a rant. Current tribal politics engenders divisiveness, disagreement, conflict. And there's nothing new about that. It happens. And ideological clans close ranks and build echo chambers. That's concerning. That's not new. We can work through that. But there's more. Political and media strategies and information platforms consciously and deliberately seed mistrust and fear. As individuals and as a broader society, we may be able to work through the mistrust and fears that abound on all sides. And we do that a lot of times, but it doesn't stop there. changes and challenges through the last several presidencies, and I'm talking the big picture, not personalities, have unearthed personal and societal issues that absolutely did need to see the light of day, like it or not. Some of that may have been unintentional, simply a factor of people getting more deeply in touch with their inner Satans and monsters under the bed and boogeymen. But powerful sources with powerful voices, rather than urging unified approaches and solutions, have often sought short-term tribal gain in power and control by fanning the flames. So that increases stress for a populace already facing significant real challenges and moves us away from seeking rational solutions together, moving from concerns to fears, in many cases to terrors. Some are real, some are produced by fanning the flames. But feelings of terror, real or imagined, lead to visceral, old brain perceptions and actions directed at each other. And it becomes easier to fan those flames as the heat rises. So against this viral propagation of real and perceived terror, there is an effective prevention, treatment, and vaccine. And we already have it. And it's easy to distribute and to administer. Our new brain has allowed us to broaden and deepen our perception and nuanced practice of compassion beyond the old brain focus on direct sensing and reaction. But we may be coming full circle to a point where our clever new brain has been co-opted to fool the old brain into a continuous fight and flight state, based not on the threats we see and know, but those we have been led to imagine. And the new brain is very good at imagining and getting the old brain to react to the imagining. And there's a solution to this challenge. It's compassion. Simple, maybe too simple. Direct, maybe too direct. So will we overthink our way into bigger messes, or sense and feel and rise to our higher instincts to reach a newer and in some ways older level of compassion? Thank you.
Now we have him.
And we will have another hymn now.
For all that is our life, we sing our thanks and praise. For all life is a gift which we are called to use to build the common good and make our own days glad. For needs which others serve, for services we give, for work and its rewards, for hours of rest and love, we come with praise and thanks. For all that is our life, for sorrow we must bear, for failures, pain and loss, for each new thing we sing our thanks and praise, for all life is a gift which we are called to use to build the common good and make our own days glad.
That was beautiful. Offering.
Closing words first.
Oh, let's do closing words first. I would propose this as a pledge for us. I see you. I see and honor that each and all of us are both alone and inseparable in this life. I will be distracted by trivia and sensationalism, and also by that which is of supreme importance. And then I will pause and allow compassion, and will again see you and honor that each and all of us are both alone and inseparable in this life. Let's see here, where's that? I'm looking for the words, here we go. There are several ways to make an offering, that in any way that you choose or may choose in the future, let this be an offering to sustain and strengthen this place, which is so sacred to many of us, a community of memory and hope, for we are keepers of the dream.
Get it backwards.
I don't know, it sounded okay.
So we have discussion.
Well, let us have discussion. And I think, can't see the clock, it's so bright.
We've got a quarter till.
Okay. I would like to jump into just some discussion. I've got a few kind of bullet points for discussion if needed, but I've got a hunch that people may have things to say. So let's discuss.
I'm not sure of the relevance of what I have to say, but I've been having difficulty being compassionate toward number 45 and his followers. And two things come to mind in regard to that. I feel like hopefully we're moving away from here's a quote by Khalil Gibran, which is, strange that creatures with no backbones have the hardest shells. Hopefully we're moving away from that and towards something that would allow more compassion in terms of the type of leadership. And that is, and I may have quoted this before, which is Dag Hammarskjöld saying, your position never gives you the right to command. It only places on you the responsibility of so living your life that others can receive your orders without being humiliated. Hopefully that's where we're headed for not just one person in an Oval Office, but also for all of us.
Thanks, Bruce. And I agree with you. I think a lot of my resonance with compassion right now is that that's within our power. And I obviously believe in system change and in other changes, but I also feel pretty strongly that unless our norms change and unless the way we see and relate to each other changes, those systems will rebound back to the same conflicted nonsense. Thanks for your comment.
I'll make a comment. One of the things that, I wonder if people can hear me.
Probably not. Come on up.
One of the things that struck me about your talk, Cal, is a sense of hopefulness. Because in the story that you were telling, there seemed like an evolution from more old brain to new brain, that as we have evolved as a species, our capacity to become more compassionate has increased. It's not entirely perfect, and that there hasn't been any setbacks, as you've pointed out, but that there's a theme of hopefulness I found in your talk. And I wonder if you could comment on the idea that as we continue to evolve as species, that we can achieve greater compassion. Do you see that?
I do see that, and that was for me a part of my presentation. And it's certainly not we're home free or kumbaya at this point. But the thing that our increased capability and capacity for thinking does is gives us many, many, many more choices. And for me, at least thinking about this now, my biggest fear distilled probably is that we will get in our own way of compassion. And that both simple and complex dynamic is challenging for us now, because we've learned to operate in different and in many cases less human and less compassionate ways. And I think there are ways out, and I think we can do it. Whatever happens in Washington, whatever happens wherever, as far as structure, that's important stuff. But in the meantime, we have work to do with us. And that'll make all the difference.
And we seem to have the brains to be able to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, we have the brains. I think the will and the choice are the crux.
Perhaps movement on that path would suggest, and I find this is something I struggle with, is rather than being emotionally reactive, being more thoughtfully responsive to a given situation or set of circumstances. In the old brain, we're functioning more at the survival level. You had to react to survive. Now, hopefully, with the newer brain, we have time to consider more rather than just react to a given life or death kind of situation. And I fight with my old brain along those lines.
Thanks, Bruce. And interesting that you would say fight, because I think that is a really good fight. One of the things I thought a lot about and made a lot of notes about for discussion, and then realized I didn't have 4 hours this morning, is what it does for me to realize where I get stuck and where I block myself and where I fail to choose compassion, because I avoid thinking about that. I don't like that about myself. That's not who and what I want to be, and it is part of who I am. Welcome to the world, but it's really, and it's tricky stuff to the extent that I can accept that blocking or that avoidance or that getting tangled up in ego. It's a long list. I learn more about how to let that go a little bit, and also about what gets other people stuck. Literally, I can do a 30-second turnaround from being irritated and sad about someone who's being anything but compassionate. And within 30 seconds, I find that I'm in the same space with someone else who's bent my feelers or said something I disagree with or not behaving the way I'd like them to. And it's just, I think it's good to realize that. And it's really tough to say, okay, now what? What do I do about that? Thanks, Bruce.
One of the hardest parts is when my mouth gets ahead of my brain or my actions get ahead of my brain.
I think there's something that's really reductive about this idea of an old brain and new brain, though. It's not.
Not that simple.
It's not that simple. And I think that that when we make a binary like that, that it causes the potential pitfall of us, claiming, oh, we're very evolved. We've got this higher consciousness, and these people who we disagree with, they're living back in their basal instincts, right? And this is their problem. When really, the roots of compassion are coming out of the emotional centers that are very much part of our midbrain, the old brain, the reptilian brain. It's what gives rise to our ability to feel for other people. All of that is starting down in the most fundamental hormonal centers of our mind, and the patterns in which we can come to work with other people and feel good about supporting each other. Those reward systems are also integrally linked with the midbrain, that old reptilian brain. The fact that we can reflect on it and talk about it and, say, craft a religion to access, ways in which we can, do better at supporting each other using these patterns, that's pretty uniquely human. But maybe it just struck me, this idea how St. Francis called his body brother donkey, and in a sense, maybe the mind is also, there's this philosophical level, but it's not getting anywhere without the workhorse of the mind, which is that old core. We as humans have evolved this higher level only in a few 100,000 years, but life had worked on building that reptilian brain for 3 billion years, right? So this idea that there's a binary and that we need to fight against our old instincts, it's our old instincts that are pointing us to the truth that suffering is something which, when ameliorated, makes the world a better place.
I couldn't agree more. That's, I'm really glad you pointed that out, because it's not black and white, either or, good and bad. It's one of our choices, to some extent, is how we engage and hear different parts of life and different parts of our brain. And that was one of the things that I liked about choosing a story that didn't require highly evolved, intelligent. We're pretty impressed with ourselves, with our level of intellect, and to think about it doesn't require brilliance to experience and allow compassion.
Something from your talk which kind of triggered this thought in my mind was when you said something about, to be rational in order to be compassionate. And I just think I often hear from the political spectrum that end of it that I so disagree with, they're all about rationality.
Right.
And they would claim that the most rational thing we could be is afraid of all of these, people who would hurt us. They're all about being really rational. And they would say we're rational about fear. Whereas, of course, we all know that when you abide in fear, you're not thinking rationally.
Right.
But their argument has a lot of good points, right? And so it's kind of a weird thing to say, well, maybe we need to be irrational and we need to irrationally just care for each other, even though that's kind of like you're stepping out into the unknown or something.
Thanks, Ian. I like that.
I'd like to say that I really agree with, thank you for bringing up, Ian, the use of all that we have, which is both brains, or old and new and in between. And that it's a kind of thing that maybe I struggle more, fight more with my ability or inability to effectively use all that I have available. Maybe that'd be a better way to say it. It's just, it is a struggle.
Can I, Cal, your talk today brought him, I had to run upstairs and get this article that I just finished reading last night. And there's one sentence in here that I hope everybody wouldn't mind if I just read it out loud. A woman named Danielle Allen, at the end of a conversation between her and several other people, said the challenge is to build public conversations that lay out clear ways of thinking about what self-interest is and whether or not self-interest is tied to the well-being of the whole. And that's, to me, a much less, a less binary, but a sort of a more gray, that old, where do we fit in the tribes? Where do we fit as individuals, our dependence and our independence and all of those things. And I just think that it will require a lot of us using a lot of our brains, if not all of our brains, to hold those clear thinking in public conversations. And the compassion, I think, for me, comes in to enable me to be on the listening side of those conversations. Anyway, big topics. Thank you.
Thank you. As you were talking about that, I just think, as I was thinking about presidencies, I really wasn't thinking about policy or platforms. And it occurs to me that I could pick a couple of those presidents who, not necessarily based on plan or intent, just being who they were and the fact that they were in that office has stimulated, depending on your point of view, so much hope and so much fear. And I don't think any of us really recognize that. It's easier if I use Obama. I was delighted with his presidency, and I think that the fact of his presidency has surfaced really, really, really deep fears that were not being talked about much and have to be surfaced. And that certainly, other than in a more thoughtful way, that certainly wasn't his intent, but just there's a visceral response to how we categorize someone who we see in a position of power. And the contrast there really, I think, challenges us to bridge that gap and to take the gift of becoming aware of things that are really, really uncomfortable to be aware of, and find that way to connect with each other around and across them. Thank you.
We'll extinguish the tallow.
Let's do that. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
If people want to stay on and chat, they can.
Don't know if you could hear Victor, but if people would like to stay on and chat, feel free to do that.
And I'm so sorry I screwed up twice today.